Some of Europe's most famous attractions are absolutely worth the money, others honestly feel overpriced the minute you walk in. So in this video, I'm ranking 24 of Europe's top cultural attractions based on how worth it they are compared to what they charge. And even if you disagree with some of my rankings, I think you'll be surprised by how much these famous attractions actually cost these days. I'm Roger from PriceOfTravel.com. Let's start with number 24 and work our way up to number 1. At number 24 is the stair climb at the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Admission to the Field of Miracles, where the tower stands next to the cathedral it was originally built for as a bell tower, is actually free, so you can wander around and take all the goofy perspective photos you want without spending €1. But they charge about $23 to climb the tower itself, which honestly feels pretty steep considering the inside is basically empty and the view from the top doesn't even include the one thing Pisa is famous for. At number 23 is the Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna for about $43 including the audio guide. This was the summer palace of the Habsburg family, who ruled a huge chunk of Europe for around 500 years. The palace is enormous and impressive, and the huge gardens are included as well. But it's also pretty expensive, and honestly there aren't many surprises here. It's a massive, fancy royal palace, which is exactly what you already thought it would be. At number 22 is Stonehenge, which sits in a huge field about 2 hours southwest of London. I visited again a few years ago, and honestly I still think it's super cool. It's mysterious, unusual, and surprisingly impressive in person. But admission is now around $42, and that doesn't include the tour bus you'll probably arrive on. It's well maintained and definitely worth seeing if you're interested in ancient history, but it's also another one that looks almost exactly like you expect it to when you finally get there. Next up at number 21 is the elevator to the 3rd floor of the Eiffel Tower, which now costs around $42. The tower itself is incredible to see in person, and of course you can do that for free, but actually going up can be a hassle because of the security lines, huge crowds, and the pretty steep ticket price. And honestly, your best Paris photos are probably from the 2nd floor anyway. If you go all the way to the top, you're so high up that the city below almost looks flat, plus it's usually packed with people. That said, it's still one of those things you probably have to do once. Next up at number 20, and I might get some hate for this, the Anne Frank house. I've read the diary and it's obviously an incredible and deeply important story, but honestly, visiting the actual hiding place didn't affect me as much as I expected it to. Tickets are around $19, and even with reservations, the lines and crowds can still be intense. And this may sound strange, but the attic itself is actually a bit larger than I imagined from reading the book. I know a lot of people feel like they have to visit the Anne Frank house while they're in Amsterdam, but if you're short on time or on the fence about it, this might be one you skip. Next up at number 19 is climbing Cologne Cathedral in Cologne, Germany, still the country's most visited landmark. At over 500 feet tall, this massive Gothic cathedral is the tallest twin-spired church in the world, and it's genuinely amazing to see in person. It's also super convenient because it sits right next to Cologne's main train station, and admission to the cathedral itself is actually free, so you should absolutely go inside. They charge around $14 to climb the tower and see a few extra areas, but this is another one where the free version is honestly the best part anyway. At number 18 is the Alhambra Palace and Fortress Complex in Granada, Spain. Construction started here around 800 years ago, and especially if you haven't visited many Islamic landmarks before, the Alhambra is pretty incredible. The architecture, courtyards, and detailed carvings are all seriously impressive. Tickets are around $25 and also include the beautiful Generalife Gardens next door, and honestly, if you visit Granada, this is absolutely something you should see. That said, there are quite a few places still coming up on this list that impressed me even more. At number 17 is Edinburgh Castle in Edinburgh, Scotland, and from here on out these attractions just keep getting better. The castle itself looks incredible, towering over the city from the hill above, and the views from inside are fantastic as well. Tickets are around $31, and unlike a lot of European palaces, this place feels much more like a serious military fortress than a fancy royal residence. It sits at one end of Edinburgh's famous Royal Mile, and honestly, if you visit the city, this is definitely worth doing. Next up at number 16 is the Tower of London, which is actually more of a military fortress complex with a relatively small tower inside the walls. Parts of it date back nearly 1,000 years, and the history here really is incredible. But tickets now cost around $49, and honestly this place would rank much higher if it were half that price. And while history buffs will probably love it, if you don't already know much about what you're looking at, parts of the experience can honestly feel a little dry, so I probably wouldn't bring younger kids here. There's also a separate line inside if you want to see the crown jewels, so I definitely understand why some visitors skip this one altogether. At number 15 is the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, first built as a church around 1500 years ago, and now functioning as a grand mosque with a fascinating and sometimes controversial history since then. Non-Muslim visitors currently pay around $28 to visit the upper gallery and museum areas, and the views from up there are incredible. And honestly, this is one of those buildings that somehow feels much larger on the inside than it looks like from the outside. It's an amazing place and definitely worth visiting if you're in Istanbul. At number 14 is the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, Italy, the first of several art museums on this list where the building itself is a huge part of the experience along with the artwork. The Uffizi is housed inside a nearly 500-year-old palace dating back to the height of the Italian Renaissance, and most of the collection comes from that same period. Tickets are currently around $28, and honestly, even if you don't usually consider yourself an art museum person, this is one you should still think about visiting. At number 13 is the Prado Museum in Madrid. This is another one of those museums where wandering through the centuries-old building would honestly be enjoyable even if there were no artwork inside. But this also happens to be Spain's national art museum with famous works by artists including Goya and El Greco. Tickets are only around $17 these days, so if you visit Madrid you should probably spend at least a couple hours here, unless you want your friends back home thinking you're some kind of uncultured Philistine. Next up at number 12 is Prague Castle, and I honestly enjoyed this one much more than I expected to. After you've toured a few historic castle complexes around Europe, they can honestly start to feel a little similar after a while, but Prague Castle felt very different to me. Instead of touring one main building, you're really exploring a huge hilltop complex with amazing views as you gradually walk downhill toward the river past churches, courtyards, towers, and other landmarks. Tickets are only around $20, and in a city packed with great sights, I still think this is the best one. At number 11 is the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, another world-class museum housed inside a landmark building that's more than 200 years old. Tickets are now around $28, and this is where you'll find Rembrandt's famous Night Watch, along with many other masterpieces from the Dutch masters. The nearby Van Gogh Museum often has even longer lines, but honestly, this is probably the museum most visitors should choose unless they're a serious Van Gogh fanatic. The Rijksmuseum was actually closed for renovations for nearly 10 years, and I haven't visited since it reopened, but I'm pretty confident it's still amazing. By the way, if you're enjoying this, it really helps the channel to hit the like button and/or subscribe. Okay, we finally made it to the top 10, and from here on out, these are all places that are amazing even if they charge a bit too much to get in. At number 10 is the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. This is one of those museums where it's genuinely hard not to be shocked by some of the things you see. I still remember looking at intricate gold jewelry pieces that are around 4,000 years old that honestly look like they could have been made today. The collection here spans nearly 9,000 years of Greek history, and at around $23 to enter, this is absolutely a must-visit if you're in Athens. At number 9 is the Palace of Versailles just outside Paris. The palace complex dates back around 400 years and became the royal residence of King Louis XIV. This place is absolutely enormous, and the huge gardens are a major attraction all by themselves. Tickets now cost around $36, and it remains one of the most visited tourist attractions anywhere in the world. And honestly, if you've only got the patience and attention span to tour one giant royal palace in your entire life, this is probably the one to choose. At number 8 is the Louvre Museum in Paris, probably the most famous museum in the world and also a former royal palace that dates back more than 200 years. And if you've ever visited the Louvre or honestly even read about it, you already know the main issue here. It's enormous, overwhelming, and usually very crowded. But at the same time, if it's your first trip to Paris, you obviously have to go. Years ago, I even wrote a blog post explaining how to see the Mona Lisa, the Venus de Milo, and a handful of other highlights in less than an hour, and honestly, I don't blame anyone for hustling through if the crowds get too intense. Even a relatively short visit here is still worth it. Tickets for non-Europeans are now around $36, which is almost double what they cost just a few years ago. At number 7 are the Vatican Museums in Vatican City, which is completely surrounded by Rome. The Louvre is currently the most visited museum in the world, and this one is number 2, in case you've got a pub quiz coming up or something. For better or worse, this is where the Catholic Church keeps its enormous collection of art and treasures, and honestly, it's about as impressive as you can imagine. Tickets are around $23 these days, which actually feels like a bargain compared to a lot of the other attractions on this list. You follow a one-way route through roughly 24 galleries, eventually ending in the Sistine Chapel with Michelangelo's famous ceiling. And even if you don't normally think of yourself as an art museum person, this experience is way less boring than it might sound. At number 6 is the Acropolis of Athens, that flat-topped hill in Athens you've probably seen in photos your entire life. And sitting on top of it is the Parthenon, along with several other structures dating back around 2,500 years. But honestly, this is one of those places, like the Pyramids of Giza or the Colosseum, where it almost feels surreal to finally stand there in person after hearing about it your whole life. Tickets are now around $34, and if you visit during the summer, definitely try to go in the morning because it gets extremely hot up there. At number 5 is the Colosseum in Rome, and from here on out we're obviously talking about absolute heavy hitters. Unless you grew up in southern Italy, the instantly recognizable image of the partially crumbled Colosseum is probably one of the most famous sights on Earth. And once you catch the travel bug, this is one of those places you eventually have to see for yourself. Tickets are only around $20, and that also includes the nearby ruins of ancient Rome, so this is really 2 incredible attractions in one. And honestly, the events that took place here 2,000 years ago were so insane that somebody will probably make a movie about them someday. At number 4, I've got riding a Venice Vaporetto through the canals of Venice. And yes, I realize this is a slightly different category from most of the attractions on this list, but the canals themselves are historic man-made engineering projects, so I think this still counts as a cultural attraction. The Vaporetto is basically Venice's public water bus system, and it's how locals and tourists alike get around the city, or at least across the Grand Canal. A ticket costs around $11 for 75 minutes of rides, and honestly, the canals of Venice are still one of the most amazing sights anywhere in the world. I've visited a few places that claim to be the Venice of the North or whatever, and none of them come even close. So yeah, you should probably see the real thing before it sinks into the lagoon for good. At number 3 is the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, mostly because it's so bizarre looking and the story behind it is so fascinating. The famous Catalan architect Antonio Gaudí designed it and took over the project in 1883, and it's literally still under construction today. I mean, just look at this thing. It's finally close to completion now, with the official inauguration planned for 2026, although construction is apparently supposed to continue for several more years after that. When I visited back in 2005, the inside was basically just a giant hard hat construction zone without much to see. But now the interior is nearly finished, and honestly it looks incredible. At around $29 to enter these days, I think it's absolutely worth it. At number 2 is the British Museum in central London, which has developed somewhat of a controversial reputation in recent years, and I'm not really going to get into all of that here. But controversy aside, this place is incredible, with more than 8 million objects in its permanent collection, including the actual Rosetta Stone and countless other artifacts you've probably heard about your whole life. And not only is it centrally located for an easy visit, but admission is completely free, or more accurately, courtesy of British taxpayers. Because it's so accessible and easy to visit, I honestly think the British Museum does a beautiful job of connecting ordinary people with art, history, and ancient civilizations. You really have no excuse not to stop in for at least a little while. My number 1 choice, and this probably won't seem obvious at first, is Pompeii, just south of Naples, Italy. I first knew Pompeii as the place where Pink Floyd recorded a live concert film with no audience back in the early 1970s, but later I learned that it was actually a wealthy and surprisingly sophisticated Roman city that was buried almost instantly under volcanic ash from Mount Vesuvius. Because of that, huge parts of the city were preserved incredibly well, including stone buildings, streets, mosaics, artwork, and even everyday details of ordinary Roman life. Honestly, this place is so amazing that I still think about it all the time, so I guess that officially makes me one of those guys who thinks about the Roman Empire regularly. Tickets are only around $23, and there's a good chance you still won't believe what you're seeing even after you get there. So that's my list, and I'm sure your rankings would probably look very different from mine. Let me know down in the comments what I got wrong, because I'd genuinely love to hear other people's opinions on these places. And thanks for watching all the way to the end. YouTube thinks the video on your screen right now is another one you might enjoy, so click on that next. And hit like and subscribe if you want more travel videos like this.